Today, I have the distinct pleasure of discussing the recent developments regarding UFOs and the alien presence with a man who I consider to be one of the preeminent ufologists of our time, Richard Dolan. Richard is more than just a casual UFO researcher. He is a historian with academic training and a highly analytical thinker. He's also a superb writer and the author of several books, including UFOs and the National Security State and AD After Disclosure, which are both particularly apropos to our discussion today. Richard, thank you for agreeing to this public conversation with me at such a pivotal moment in history.
Well, it is a pleasure, honestly, to be here with you, Timothy. We have known each other for a number of years, and I've always appreciated our conversation. So it's nice to be here at this time.
Likewise. Yesterday was a truly historic day. The House Committee on Oversight and Accountability conducted a remarkable hearing on unidentified anomalous phenomena, implications on national security, public safety, and government transparency, during which members of the committee posed questions to three witnesses, Ryan Graves, David Fravor, and David Grusch. Graves and Fravor were both Air Force pilots who had personally encountered UFOs during training missions, and Grusch is an official whistleblower from the intelligence community. I would say, from my perspective, Richard, that the headline to yesterday's hearing would be written, in my mind, thusly: the alien presence is real and constitutes a national security threat. So the first question I want to ponder with you here, and I think you're uniquely positioned to answer this question: is this, in your mind, official disclosure? And if so, is it rolling out in the manner that you expected?
Yeah, great question. I don't think this is an official disclosure, because what I think we are seeing, until I'm proven wrong, I'm going to maintain this position that we are looking at a factional war going on within the national security state, the deep state. This is something that, if you go through the history, you find was referred to back in the 1950s, in a sense. The writer Donald Keyhoe back then, with his connections in the national security community, talked about the Secrecy group and spoke about factions within the government that opposed the Secrecy group on the matter of UFOs. And there's been a lot of permutations over the years, but I think fundamentally we are looking at a factional war. So there has been a great deal of obfuscation by the Department of Defense, I would even say by NASA and other groups, against further release of this information to the public. But there have been individuals on the other side of this, and they've been quite active for the past 5-6 years. We're looking at people like Chris Mellon, Lou Elizondo, of course, and now this latest batch of individuals who spoke yesterday, the two Navy pilots and David Grusch. And, they have supporters as well. So I think that's what we're looking at. So I wouldn't call it any kind of official disclosure, but I would say that yesterday's hearing was historic. It was actually very historically noteworthy and important, and went far beyond what I would have expected. I'll be perfectly honest in saying that. A month ago, even after Grusch was interviewed and made his big splash about his allegations, I was not expecting congressional hearings. I just thought the U.S. always has a way of acting in bad faith or of dropping the ball when they need to carry it and all of that. But we had members of Congress who clearly, you see this in the hearing yesterday, I think about 15 or so members chimed in. I mean, everyone seemed to want to get involved in this. And frankly, they were asking overall pretty good questions, pretty on point. They seemed to be interested. People like Burchett, Matt Getz, Anna Polina Luna, they were all very, very direct in what they had to say and in their distrust of the Pentagon as well. So that's interesting. Now, whether this is going to lead to a genuine disclosure, that is an admission, maybe that's the word we should be using at here. We talk about disclosure, but really it's an admission by the United States government. And whether we're going to get that or not that's still an open question for me. You asked a follow-up question, and golly, I cannot remember what the second part of your question was.
I just asked you if you believe that this does constitute disclosure. Is it rolling out in the manner that you would have expected?
Well, I'll just continue a little bit along those lines. So I think the question is how high up. I have people writing me every single day, either suggesting or telling me their knowledge. What they think is the case that this is a complete stage managed operation.
A
PSYOP, whether by some high individual or group in the intelligence community or the aliens themselves. I've heard this one as well. And the question is, who would be playing this game? If it's within the intelligence community, where is this coming from and for what end? The only explanation that I've ever been able to hear from that side of it are people who are talking about a false flag, and this is something to scare up the public, to have them come running to the government for protection from aliens. I do not see that, and I do not believe that that is the case at all. So what I think is we've got a genuine battle here, a battle royale, and how this is going to turn out is, I don't know if anyone can really predict this at this point.
I get a lot of people telling me, no, this is a PSYOP. A lot of people even saying that aliens aren't real. Everybody references Wernher von Braun's famous testimony, or the testimony of his secretary, that at the end of his life, he said that the final deception is going to be an alien invasion. And
Carol Rosin, yes.
Right. And what I find so baffling about this is that there is an actual alien threat. You don't have to invent one. It exists already. And so, and you talk about this factional war, and I absolutely agree with that analysis. People have to understand that there isn't just one faction at work behind the scenes. It's very fractionated. There are various factions with various goals. Right. And I think this is evident in the fact that I think it was a week or two before Grusch came out with his claims. People forget that NASA had a public meeting. NASA they have an advisory board. I think they initiated this over a year ago. They have an advisory board tasked with studying UAPs. They came out with their initial findings. And this is what Dan Evans, the study director at the hearing, proclaimed. I want to emphasize this loud and proud, that there is absolutely no convincing evidence for extraterrestrial life associated with UAPs. That was NASA's position right before Grusch comes out with his incredible claims. And then after Grusch, the Pentagon released its official response, which was this: to date, AARO has not discovered any verifiable information to substantiate claims that any programs regarding the possession or reverse engineering of extraterrestrial materials have existed in the past or exist currently. And so everybody who's claiming this is a PSYOP, well, a PSYOP by whom? I mean, we have NASA's official declaration here, and we have the Pentagon's official declaration. They're not running with this at all. They're trying to rebut it. And also, yesterday, I found it incredible that in the aftermath of that testimony at the Capitol, I pulled up Fox News, I pulled up CNN, MSNBC, all the major news platforms, and none of them were making a big deal about this. None of them. I mean, they all mentioned it in their programming. They mentioned it, of course, but it wasn't. They weren't making it, like bombshell. Aliens exist, and the government knows, or something like that. Right? That's right. What you would expect. This should be like a 9/11 headline on the front page of every newspaper. Your thoughts on that?
I think this speaks exactly to what you and I are saying, that we're dealing with a factional war, because those of us in the UFO community, we tend to live in a bubble. And we tend to think that everything that happens in our field is the single most important thing for everyone else in the world. It may be the most important thing in the world. What we are studying is of profound importance and significance to our world. But that does not mean that 99% of the public out there that is essentially oblivious is going to learn about it. And the fact, I was wondering the same thing to this extent. I was saying, What's going to matter is how the major media covers this in the aftermath, and how will that be done? And as you're pointing out, not a whole lot. There has been some coverage. They've been obligated to cover it in a sense.
Right.
I think the media follows the factional struggle that's going on in the rest of the national security community. And of course it should. The media is an arm of the national security community at this point. So you will see different factions. But really the only, let's say, significantly large media that's doing anything is probably News Nation. And they're really alternative anyway. They're hitting up everyone. They're talking to everyone in the field, and they're actually covering it. And they're trying to, I think, maybe stake their ground in the wider world with us. So fair enough. That's great. But when you're talking about major legacy media, I think you're absolutely right. They're not covering it as of now. And this would be the time. It's out there in a few places. But no, and it's going to get swallowed up. I mean, you've got a presidential election coming up. You got one side of the fence trying to put Trump in prison. You got the other side going after the Bidens. This is what they care about. Are they really going to switch gears now and go into? I mean, the allegations of Grusch were powerful, and they were not explicit in public. But he certainly, speaking to Congress here, he's not just talking to some journalists off the street. He is telling members of Congress, this is real. There are alien craft, multiple that we have possession of, that are in private corporate hands as well. And not only did he say, I know the corporations, but he said, I know the divisions. I know the departments where they are.
He knows exactly where these craft are located. He said he's going to tell Congress behind closed doors.
Well, I'm sure he and others already have. They spoke to Dr. Eric Davis a couple of years ago. There are members of Congress who are all over this now. And I think, but I don't know. But I think that this is why, what is motivating some of them. I mean, it's a crazy thing to think. Like, can a member of Congress actually act in good faith on something?
Right. And this is what I wanted to ask you. Not only could a member of Congress act in good faith, because who knows what's going on behind the scenes from the intelligence community, the kind of
what we are hearing. I'm sorry to interrupt, but what we're hearing is they're stonewalling, they're obfuscating, and they are threatening.
Exactly right.
So,
exactly. And there were two remarkable revelations yesterday from Grusch, and one of them we already knew, and the other one I think was a little bit more of an elaboration on something he hinted at in the interview he did on News Nation. Obviously, the first revelation is just a reiteration of what he has already said, that there have been programs at the Pentagon to recover and reverse engineer alien craft and also recover the bodies, the biological entities, the pilots, as he calls them, of these craft. So that's the big bombshell. But then secondarily, he also yesterday he gave us a little bit more insight into the let's call it persecution that he's experiencing from I would imagine it would have to be officials from the intelligence community, and perhaps even from the U.S. military. And he's talking about his life has been threatened and his family. And he was very shaken. You could see when he was saying this that he was very shaken. I think therein lies the main motivation for Grusch coming forward with these accusations and allegations. I think he's been severely threatened behind the scenes, and we know not just by elements of the United States government, but also by these private contractors.
And
this is what I always remind people: if you go to Area 51, I don't think there's anything there anymore. Ever since the Bob Lazar story broke, I think they probably moved most of what they had in the S4 facility in Area 51. But if you go to Area 51 or some secret military installation, people are under the notion that they're under the impression that you're going to run into U.S. military personnel, which I think is more often than not going to be the case. You're going to run into private contractors, private security contractors. And these people have a history, as you well know, of being very aggressive and even violent in maintaining the secrecy of what's going on in these installations. And it doesn't surprise me at all that Grusch said that these private contractors were being very threatening, and and were making him feel like he was in danger, that his life was in danger and that his family was in danger. And that people need to keep that in mind. That is one of the primary motivations of Grusch coming forward. And it is really one of the only ways, if you want to talk about this, if you want to blow the whistle on this, you have to do it publicly, because the cover-up is aggressive. The pressure, the threats, it's very real behind the scenes. And so coming to light and going to Congress, and there was also, in part because of Christopher Mellon, there was also a pathway now to blow the whistle, and there are some protections in place that allowed Grusch to do this. And so I'm just sort of trying to address this idea that this is all just a psyop, and people have the tendency, and to some degree, I perfectly understand why, people have the tendency to totally disbelieve anything that comes out of institutions anymore. Totally 100% disbelieve it. Oh, so...
Well, that's a healthy instinct.
Right, exactly. So the media is promoting, and by media, of course, they're referring to this alternative site, News Nation, is pushing this UFO story. Therefore, it must be a psyop, right? Congress is getting involved. Therefore, it must be a psyop. And I don't think that logic works, especially not in this case. I think we should be distrustful of institutions, especially in the post pandemic world, but at the same time, I think we have to have a much more complex analysis than that.
Yeah, absolutely. The missing piece that some of these analysts are needing is exactly the idea that there are fights that go on in elite institutions all the time. There are always disagreements. I tell people, as you go back 2,000 years to ancient Rome, and you had Caesar and Pompey and Crassus, they were the triumvirate that fought each other. There are always disagreements among elites about how policy should proceed in one form or another. And by the way, that doesn't mean that the members of Congress who are opposed to the Pentagon on this matter, that they're going in all of this with gasoline and matches and they want to burn the whole place down. They're not revolutionaries. So they are members of the establishment. Chris Mellon is a member of the establishment. He's not trying to start a revolution here. And I don't even know if they're really pushing for true and open full disclosure of UFOs. It's not clear to me that that's their goal. Not sure. What is evident, though, is that they have a different opinion about how policy should be on this matter. I don't think there's any question that they believe that the policy of cover-up that's existed since the 40s and 50s is in a lot of ways obsolete. It's not working in the 21st century, in the age of internet, in the age of what we have, instant communication, that a new and I think even the secrecy group probably has this idea. So there is something to, like, when people are distrustful here, if we were in charge of running the secret, we would be thinking, all right, it's 2023, straight up denial, a la 1955 is not going to work anymore. Mm-hmm. You can't just say, there's nothing there. Right. No one will believe that. And so from their point of view,
with cameras and video recording software.
So from their point of view, that is the people wanting to manage the secrecy and to continue it. It's not difficult to see that they would want to give the secrecy a facelift as well. And this is what has been happening ever since Mellon and Elizondo hit the scene in 2017. We have seen the U.S. Navy, we've seen Pentagon spokespersons slowly admitting that, oh, yes, there are things out there that we can't always identify. Now, that's a very defensible position, and that still allows them to maintain the cover-up of the genuine UFO, UAP phenomena. So you can, and this is, I think, what they've been doing, but that's a different thing to say than Mellon and Elizondo and Leslie Kean and Blumenthal. They're all in on it. To like, let's update the cover-up, guys, because it's not working. That's not how you would do that. So I think we're seeing a definite factional struggle, and then the secrecy group is adjusting. They're adjusting their defensive strategy, as it were. And I think and it's all along. We're seeing manipulations and modifications of the position. Each side is like a very complex chess poker match rolled into one.
And even the updating of the terminology I find interesting. Because it seems to me that the Pentagon is wanting to approach this topic in a way that sort of circumvents all of the problems surrounding the traditional terminology, which is UFO.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And so they've trotted out this new terminology, UAP. And it's like,
And they've
let's
changed
start.
that acronym a few times, by the way.
Right.
So it was originally
exactly,
unidentified aerial phenomena. Now it's unidentified anomalous
phenomena. Right. Exactly. And so it's like, let's start from here. No. Let's not talk about anything pre-Nimitz incident. Let's just start from here. Let's begin the conversation right here. And let's talk about anomalous phenomena.
In other words, no more objects, and they're not flying. So if they were unidentified flying objects, that immediately gives a sense of a physical thing in the air, zooming around. You got a UAP, anomalous phenomena. What is that?
Yeah,
it could be a blob of something, like a cloud. Who knows? So yeah, it does. It softens the meaning. It's much less descriptive. I mean, this is how language goes. I'm an old George Carlin fan, and he talked about this all the time, how language just gets softened over the years. We started with flying saucers in 1947, 48. Flying saucers, crystal clear. That gets modified in the 50s to unidentified flying objects. It's a little softer, not quite as visceral. And now we're at UAP, unidentified aerial phenomena, now unidentified anomalous phenomena. We just keep getting more and more nebulous as we go.
Almost as if the Pentagon is saying, hey, public, let's kind of figure this out together. Let's start looking into this. We're going to start looking into this. How convenient for the Pentagon.
Yeah, we'll get back to you when we find something. You'll be the first to know.
Exactly. Right. How convenient. They don't have to talk about abductions. They don't have to talk about, they don't have to talk about, and of course, Grusch, this is one of the other remarkable things that Grusch said, or at least alluded to yesterday. They don't have to talk about the fact that they probably murdered people who got too close to this, to the truth regarding some of these programs and the phenomena itself. They don't have to talk about any of these skeletons in the closet. No, they just want to close that door. And they opened up a new one. And this is where the public conversation resides at this point. UAP. And I always tell people, I hate that. I hate that terminology. UAP. I don't want to talk about UAPs. I want to talk about UFOs. I want to talk about what people like you and other good ufologists over the decades have been talking about since the beginning of this thing. And by the way, nothing that Grusch said, when I listened to Grusch's testimony, that interview, I think it was last month, when that story broke on News Nation, I listened to Grusch. Everything that he said was just a confirmation of what people like you have been saying for decades.
Yeah.
It's nothing he said drew a red flag for me, like, oh, that's new, that's different, that's strange. No,
totally agree.
He's literally just confirming what old school ufologists have been saying for decades.
I heard people complaining that, well, he said nothing new. And I'm like, what do you want? This man has exceptionally high security clearances, and he's going public literally and formally as a whistleblower. So it's very good that he said the things that he did. But going back to your remark about the death threats and the murders, that was very disturbing. And of course, in the history, when you go through history of ufology, UFO research, there have been a number of suspicious deaths from time to time. It's happened. I wonder who he's talking about. I don't know if he's talking about military people, researchers. It was all very kind of left out there, no confirmation. And then the other thing is, I would think that you are perhaps justified in making your assumption that he came forward due to concerns for personal safety. But I don't think it's a definite. I mean, he didn't state this explicitly, as far as I remember. But when I heard you describing it, I thought this actually does make some sense to me, and that could be an important motivation. If he felt, this is what happened with Lazar over 30 years ago. He felt
exactly right.
His security, his safety was in danger, and that prompted him to go to George Knapp. So
yes,
I hadn't really thought about that with Grusch. But
in fact, when Grusch said that, what came to mind was the things that the episodes that Lazar detailed in his book. I think it's called Dreamland, is it not? I have it on my bookshelf here. And he, in his book, in Lazar's book that he published several years ago, he actually goes into great detail about some of the harassment that he was experiencing. And he was driving.
He was shot at.
He was shot at. They were breaking into his house. They were calling him, and and threatening him. All kinds of things were happening, and any one of us would. I mean, how can you live with that kind of harassment and hostility going on in the background? And if you have already begun to sort of come forward with these allegations, you got to go all the way at that point. You've got to go all the way, because that's where safety resides. You have to go all the way, especially if there's a path, whistleblower path, which didn't exist in the past for this kind of thing. But
that's right.
And this is what I'm always telling people. The circumstances are different now. The environment is different for our UFO whistleblower. There's an environment which did not exist a decade ago. There's cover now. You got guys like Tucker Carlson who for several years now have been openly discussing UFOs and government cover-ups and crash retrievals and interviewing some of these people like Fravor and some of these other individuals. And so there's public awareness now. You have cover. You did not have cover before. A decade ago, you did not have cover. If you came out with these allegations, you would have been looked at as a nut job, a crackpot. That's not the case anymore.
I remember it well.
The environment has changed.
Yeah.
And so I expect to see many more whistleblowers. I think one of the effects of yesterday's hearing is we're going to start to see more people come out of the woodwork from the military. And I think
this is the word. This is what the rumor mill is saying. This is what a number of people who have legit connections to that inside process are saying, that there will be more. There were rumors, as I'm sure you heard before yesterday's hearing, that there were potentially going to be additional witnesses as well called forth. There were not, but this was definitely something I know was discussed. And I have no doubt that there are other people available and probably ready to come forward.
Yeah. What about some of these guys from Lockheed Martin, Skunk Works, right? What about some of these guys from Boeing? What about some of these guys from what's it called, Raytheon, and some of these aerospace contractors? Because that's really where the goods are. I mean, when you talk about people who are in the know, it's the people who are literally putting their hands on this technology. And
I agree. I'll just mention a few years ago, not many, I had a long interview with Dr. Kit Green, formerly of the CIA. I have a long article about it on my website. Anyone can go check it out at richarddolanmembers.com. But basically what Kit said to me, he said, look, when you leave government service as a federal employee and you go to work and you have security clearances and all of that, and you go to work in private industry after you retire from federal service, he said typically your clearances become more and better, because that is where the action is. And we were talking explicitly about the UFO subject at that time. This is back in 2019, I believe. So, and so, yeah, I think you're right to think, you go to Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Boeing, and the rest. And this is what I think Kit made very clear to me, that, he's not saying explicitly one way or the other, but I think it was very clear that there is a corporate dimension to this phenomenon that is incredibly important. And that's in terms of the construction, the replication and construction, fabrication of vehicles that are designed from alien specs, alien reproduction vehicles, Fluxliner and things like that. That this is a significant part of our UFO phenomenon here.
So, Richard, do you believe that Congress is actually going to get access to these military, these secret military installations? Because one thing that Grusch has repeated many times is that he has already provided the Inspector General and other individuals, I believe even Congress, certainly after yesterday's hearing behind closed doors, he provided them with the exact locations, to his knowledge, where some of these recovered UFOs are being held in these installations, presumably many of them deep underground military installations. So do you think Congress is actually going to be able to access any of this technology?
Well, it's an interesting way that you put that question. So what is Congress? I think certain individual members of Congress may get this type of information. In fact, they've already gotten some of this information, but clearly they're not at liberty to talk about it, because if they were, they presumably would have already. So I I would imagine that some members of Congress may indeed, from this point onward, get some kind of information or access about these programs. But the real question will be, what can they do about it? Will they be able to do anything about it? We heard Burchett talking several times during the hearing that he tried and was unable to get the kind of access to information that he wanted. Luna was saying basically the same thing. So will they in the future get any access? I guess the answer is maybe they might, but if they do, what can they really do about it publicly? It might inform their policy decisions moving forward, but will it really make a difference? Over and over again, when you look at this subject and the structure of the secrecy, which is something I've been interested in a very long time, like how is the secret structured? Who's running this show? Who's driving the car? Grusch gave us a partial answer, which is something that I've been thinking for many years, which is it's partly private, partly public, partly government, partly not. And he was very cagey as to how that all broke down. But I think that has seemed correct to me and to many other researchers, I'm sure to yourself as well. So getting through that's a legal nightmare. Probably not without a massive or a substantial, let's say, legal revolution or changes that take place to allow federal officials, like members of Congress, for example, to get at these private special access programs. And whether in fact, some of them were talking about doing this. They were making this statement like, we want to be able to get access to these things to find out what's going on. A few years ago, when the Eric Davis, Thomas Wilson notes leaked out, which was a big thing at the time. It's still a big thing. It's still the biggest UFO leak of the century, in my opinion. But you go back through the information there, and we found that Wilson, who at the time was head of intelligence or deputy head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, not a member of Congress. He was part of the executive branch of government in a significant national defense capacity. Not only was he unable to get access to the reverse engineering program that he discovered, he was blocked by a private contractor, the gatekeepers, as he called them. Not only that, but when you listen carefully, read through his conversation with Davis, talking about the structure within the Pentagon that was shielding these programs, you find that only the smallest handful of senior Pentagon officials even have partial access
or
to
knowledge.
These programs.
Right. And
by partial access, and the impression that you get when you read these notes is they might review the program on a yearly basis and rubber stamp it and say, ask a few questions of the contractor. Everything going good? You guys still working on that program?
Exactly,
sure are. Okay,
right.
Great. Here's more funding. I think that's the extent of it. There's really no indication that anyone is truly monitoring this. If so, we're not seeing any information on that. So to answer your question, will members of Congress be able to get at this? In theory, maybe it's possible if they get some new laws passed, depending on how much they really want this, how much are they willing to fight for this. Burchett and Luna seem like they are filled with some passion on this right now, so good.
It's hard for me to imagine, for example, Ocasio-Cortez being ushered into a deep underground military installation and being shown the kind of saucer technology, for example, that Bob Lazar worked on. That to me seems it's unimaginable. I think that
That's right.
Right now, what's going on behind the scenes is that within these special access programs, the military contractors, they're probably scrambling right now, moving all of this technology to other locations other than the ones that are on this list that Grusch is providing. I mean, how difficult, because as Congressman, what is his name? You mentioned, I forgot his name, the Tennessee Congressman. Burchett said yesterday that things move very slowly in Congress. And he said he said that they're probably going to be moving some of this technology before we ever get a chance to go look at it. I mean, if it were me, if I was one of these military contractors and some of these government officials who've known about this, who've been covering it up, I would be scrambling to just relocate all of this technology, and
And
maybe
they're
even
probably
offshore.
thinking, oh, well, these congressmen all just want their little moment in the sun. I mean, why else would Ocasio-Cortez be doing this? I
Exactly
mean, honestly,
right.
so she because she's a publicity expert. I mean, this is really what she's best at.
Publicity hound.
Publicity hound. So she's like, oh, this is big. Like you could see, this is probably why, I wondered why was there a last minute switcheroo over the
Exactly
chairmanship
right.
of the
Yep.
committee. I mean, Burchett ended up running it essentially. In my opinion, he was really the dominant member of Congress.
And I think brilliantly too.
But there was all these machinations at the last minute, and I wonder. There's a couple of reasons. One might be the national security, the secrecy group is deciding, okay, we got to get control over this. Another motivation, though, might just simply be members of Congress thinking, I want in, let me in. This is going to be great publicity for me.
Exactly.
There was like 15 of them. I mean, I didn't do an actual body count, but there was many asking questions. And it's like,
and
wow,
some of them were just
really
reading statements. They weren't even asking questions. They were just reading statements. And I'm thinking, you're reading a statement. This is like, we're talking about freaking alien technology and bodies, and you're reading statements. It just was some of it was so bizarre to me.
I agree. Overall, I was impressed, to be honest with you, that some of the questions were pretty intelligent and seemed pretty sincere. Yes. I mean, as far as it goes. But I think, a lot of this is you got the members of Congress thinking, okay, I want some of this publicity because this is the UAP is no longer the kiss of death to a political career.
Quite the opposite. Yeah.
No, so it's cool. And this transformation has been happening for a few years, actually, even before 2017. I think it was starting to happen. It really was happening during the Hillary Clinton campaign in 2016.
And even with Obama.
Maybe, but with Podesta as her campaign manager back then, I think they realized if we handle this delicately, we can do this, and we might be able to get you a little bit of votes from the cool kids. That might have been what they were thinking. But I think it's more advanced now, and so you have members of Congress really wanting to get in on this. I suspect that was a big part of it. But back to your question: will Congress get access? No, I'm basically doubtful. I'm not doubtful of the motivations of some of these members of Congress. They seem genuine to me. Burchett seems genuine. Matt Gaetz, Congressman
Gaetz.
Matt Gaetz seems absolutely sincere. I listened to him. He was passionate. He was intelligent. He was on point with his statements. And there were several others who were, I think they sounded smart. They sounded good. And if they're faking it, they're doing a heck of a good job in doing that. But I think that they seem to be sincere. So, and that shouldn't surprise anybody. There are always, have always been members of Congress throughout history who sometimes get into their notion a genuine idea that they want to do this thing, that this is important to them. And it's happened even on the UFO matter in the past. Just, the moment is better now. So, but I'm not expecting them to get access. If I'm going to give an answer, I'm going to say no. I gave you a long-winded answer to the question.
I would agree with that. For one thing, they had a very weird conversation yesterday about clearance. And Grusch's answer to some of these clearance questions that they're asking, what kind of clearance does one need to access these programs? And it was a very sort of an amorphous answer that Grusch gave. I think, if I can sum this up correctly, I think he basically said it's not necessarily about what level of clearance you have, but who's going to give you access to these programs. And then he also...
That was he gave a bit of a gobbledygook answer, actually, now that you mention it. But yeah, that's kind of what he said.
Yeah, and then he talked about, and I wish I would have pulled the video up and recorded his exact terminology on this, but he kept referring to, as it pertains to moving money around, misappropriation of money, because this is how they apparently are funding some of these programs, which I think we've all suspected. that the military contractors are just charging excessive amounts of money for a particular program that is known, and then they're taking the excess and they're throwing it into these special access programs. He called this, he couldn't get into it because I think this is the terminology he used, and correct me if I'm wrong. It was something like this. He couldn't get into the trade secrets. Is that what he called them? Or the trade something?
I'm trying to recall us.
Regarding this.
Remember.
And it just seems to me, I can't believe there wasn't more outrage. Like, wait a minute. Wait a minute. It sounds like there's like this systematic program of circumventing Congress that's been in place for decades that we're just casually talking about here. I mean, that's a massive breach of the trust of the American people and of the authority of Congress. And we're just sort of flippantly talking about these trade secrets of how to misappropriate money to fund these projects, these reverse engineering projects, crash retrieval and reverse engineering projects. And I was just astounded that some of these congressmen didn't follow up with, excuse me? Whoa, wait a minute. You mean there's a systematic trade secret or operational procedure in place to circumvent us? I mean, that's a big freaking deal.
That is a good point. I don't know why I didn't remember that exact moment, but I mean, I'm just going to say on behalf of the proceedings yesterday, look, I think what was said was never said before in a session of Congress. I was thinking 10 years ago, I participated in the citizen hearings on disclosure. It was in 2013, right. 10 years ago in Washington, D.C. And that was a mock congressional hearing. That wasn't a real, so that was with several members, retired members of Congress and one member of the Senate, all of whom had recently retired. Steve Bassett organized this. He was able to bring them on board. And for an entire week at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., myself and 39, I think there were 40 of us, people, military witnesses, researchers, everyone threw in there, and we were giving testimony all week long to those members of Congress, retired. And it was a very well done thing. I think it was exceptionally well done, to be honest. But the amount of attention that we got was almost zero. And what we did get was a lot of like trash talking by like the Washington Post and the New York Times, just making fun, really making it seem like it's just a goofy, foolish effort by a bunch of crazy people. So in 10 years, we've gone from that to a genuine, actual hearing in Congress, 2023, just 10 years later, where truth bombs were being dropped. And members of Congress, look, they were responding to a lot of that. This was a watershed moment in the history of Congress, to be, in my opinion. There had been there had been congressional hearings. They called it a symposium back in 1968, which was really the last time an active session of Congress discussed this issue that I can recall. And that was nothing compared with what we had yesterday. So I think what yesterday, you had two excellent Navy pilots, Fravor and Graves. There's nothing you can say to impugn them. They're both Top Gun type guys, very high integrity. They described objects which they both explicitly said, there's no way that we're making these things. Fravor particularly. Yeah,
it's not Russian technology. It's not the Chinese. No, this is
not a chance.
This non-human technology.
There's no way, you look at the Tic Tac case of 2004, that the Russians or Chinese could have been involved in that. Not a chance. And to call it Black World Technology Special Access Program, I mean, that's the only other thing where you can go. But Fravor made his point very clear, which I've always agreed with, that it doesn't seem like something we really are doing. There's arguments. There's people who say, no, we built a Tic Tac. You hear it to this day. But in any case, it's just important that he was discussing this at all. So I'm going to give these members of Congress, I can't believe I'm saying this, I'm going to give them a little bit of credit here for taking this matter on, especially Burchett.
Yes.
Like, you can really see that this was his passion project. And
he's passionate about this, yes.
And I'm respecting him for it. Like, I know that he's interested in this subject. One of my friends is Ron James, filmmaker, who did a very good documentary called Accidental Truth on this just recently. And Ron, photographed, got a got a photo with Burchett, which I've seen. Ron showed me. And Burchett, in fact, mentioned Ron's film. That was a little bit of an aside, but he actually mentioned this is a film that covered this called Accidental Truth. He actually mentioned the name.
Mm-hmm.
So I think Burchett actually cares. And he's on good terms with a number of folks in the UFO field. So I think he means what he says here. That is the impression I do.
I do too. Now, let me ask you, this is sort of what was percolating in my mind yesterday when Grusch referenced this secrecy organization, which includes government and non-government people, something to that effect.
Yeah, that's right.
The first thing that came to my mind was MJ-12.
Sure.
That's the first thing that came to my mind. So assuming that you believe MJ-12 ever existed at all, do you think it is still in operation? And if so, are they at the top of the secrecy pyramid?
Yeah, but probably not under that name. So there's a couple of reasons to think that there's another name that might have been used called Zodiac. And like MJ-12, the number 12, Zodiac, there are 12 signs and 12 houses of the Zodiac. I've heard this from a couple of different sources that Zodiac at least may still be a current name for this group, maybe informal, I don't know. But to answer your larger question, is there such a group of, yes, I think absolutely yes. I don't think there's any question in my mind that there's a group like that, like MJ-12, like Zodiac, that would be comprised of probably mostly former government officials at this point, people who move in and out of government circles, certainly with significant private connections. Got to be someone like, Bobby Ray Inman types of guys, who was over at SAIC. I don't know if he still is. He's quite old now. So there are these major defense contractors that are out there that are, SAIC, I think, is known as NSA West, if I'm not mistaken. That's its nickname. So there are these, and what is it? It's a private corporation. It's got massive government contracts. I think that type that's the structure we're looking at. Some people who have the ability to dip their fingers into the government at any time. And this supports, again, as I was saying earlier, with what Dr. Kit Green said to me, which is that really the true power is out of the government. It's in the private corporations. That's where the money is.
And it may even be global. It may not just be a United States-based power structure. It's probably a global power structure, cabal. And that sort of leads me into it directly leads me into the next thing I wanted to ask you about is, when we're hearing about all these revelations and from Grusch, again, just confirming what ufologists such as yourself have known for decades. And to some degree, I think it's a validation of your work and others like you. How does this tie into a term that you coined a long time ago that I'm pretty sure you coined it. I've been saying that you coined it. So a long time ago that people have been using quite often now, and that is a breakaway civilization. So how do you think this ties into a breakaway civilization? Is this just the very tip of the iceberg? In other words, are we not just talking about here, in your opinion, of crash retrievals and alien bodies being recovered, which for the general public, that's astounding. For guys like you and me, that's expected, that sort of thing to come forth at some point in time if there's going to be disclosure. But I think the deeper layers here that people probably aren't contemplating, but I certainly am. We've been retrieving these technologies for decades, going all the way back to the 30s. We've been retrieving these technologies, reverse engineering them with perhaps some success. I'm sure it's been difficult. I'm sure there's aspects of the technology that are so far beyond us that we just have no idea what to do with it. And certainly this is part of Bob Lazar's testimony in the reactor that he was working with. They had no idea how that thing worked, except for a rudimentary understanding of element 115 and matter-antimatter reactor and gravity waves and so forth. But they certainly couldn't reproduce it. For one thing, they didn't have the exotic material. You can't go out and harvest material that's not from the Earth, right? So my question would be, in regard to a breakaway civilization, if we've had access to this technology for decades, which we have, are we really at the bottom level of this? Are we really talking about a faction of human beings who are so far advanced from the rest of us at this point that they're perhaps building bases on Mars at this point? Do you think that is a plausible idea?
Yeah, when I hypothesized about a breakaway civilization back in like 2008, 2009. I wrote about it first in 2009 in one of my books, a couple of articles. And even then I'm thinking, how far does this go? So the basic idea is, think of it this way. It could be really advanced and exotic, kind of what you're asking, or less so. Over the last 500 years, you can say our entire global, all of our societies around the world have been slowly integrating into, you can say, a uniform civilization. We're not there, but you can see it. It's, globalization's happening. But there are always tendencies that can go in the opposite direction. I was thinking even as recently as the old Cold War, U.S. and Soviet science did not always share information. Sometimes they went in very different directions. Same with the Germans during World War II. They were not sharing. They were in their own little cubby holes, as it were. And I asked myself back then, could the same tendency happen relating to the UFO subject? And the answer obviously was yes, for sure. If you acquire exotic technology, alien hardware, bodies, you feel that you cannot tell the world about it. So now you've got this very important bit of information that no one else has. And that allows you to develop your science in directions that no one else is going to be able to go or permitted to go. Because once you make breakthroughs, you can patent the breakthroughs in the classified world, and you just prevent outsiders from getting access to it, which I think has been the plan all along. So a civilization is not just technology. A civilization is also a cosmology. It's your idea of where you are in the universe. It's your idea of how you interact with each other socially. What is it that defines a civilization? So yes, I theorize that within the classified world of special access programs, that there could be this combination of access to advanced technology and science that no one else has, knowledge of the ET presence or the alien presence here. It's another big thing. And then the ability to maybe interact with those beings to an extent that no one else can. And I asked myself very simply, is that essentially a separate breakaway civilization? To me, the answer is yes. Now, The real question is, how far does it go? Do they have the ability to go back and forth to Mars like that? Portals, or can they do that? Have they traveled around the solar system or beyond in our own invented reproduction vehicles, our own flex liners? That's the question. I don't have the answer to that. How far does it go?
And of course, the late president of Lockheed Martin, Ben Rich, once commented, I believe he was drunk at the time, but he once commented that we now have the technology to bring ET home.
Oh, no, he was quite sober.
Oh, okay, good.
He gave that, yes. Ben Rich was head of Lockheed Skunk Works division for many years. He succeeded Kelly Johnson. And at a lecture at UCLA, actually, he did this several times. In his retirement, Ben Rich used the tagline, "We now have the technology to take ET home." That was something he liked to say. But he did state in this one particular lecture he gave at UCLA School of Engineering back in, I think, 1993, stated that now that the Cold War is over, because this is like right after that, there's no reason to keep this all secret. He's talking about the UFO phenomenon. He's talking about our technology. He said we had a problem with the math, but we've solved it, and now we know how to take ET home. And so, no, he was he seemed to be
which
quite
is a
serious
very intriguing statement, because you're not just talking about a breakaway civilization with advanced technology. But you're talking about a civilization with new aspects of physics that haven't been figured out yet in the mainstream.
Yeah.
So if you're working with new physics, it's essentially equivalent to having access to quantum mechanics and an understanding of quantum mechanics, like say, or electricity, when the rest of the world is still in the Stone Age. Rubbing sticks together to make fire. You have, what can you build? My God, if you can figure out aspects of physics that are currently unknown in the mainstream, what kind of technologies? We're talking conventional technologies now, not even exotic technologies, just conventional technologies. Can you build with this new information, just with what's available, conventional components that are available to that we all use in our automobiles, for example, in our airplane.
There's probably a number of applications that we may never know, but that are real money makers. So, you acquire this ET tech, you're like, what is this? How do I make use of it? And years go by, generations go by, and you figure out a few things. And now you've got a good ground floor investment opportunity, which, makes your motivation to give up this secret plummet to less than zero, by the way, because you've got a goose that lays golden eggs. So I think you're right on that basis. In terms of how far this civilization, the secrecy world goes, I think potentially it could go pretty far. I don't think it's impossible to say that we've got the ability to make our own flying saucers after our own fashion. In fact, look, I've heard some speculations. I don't know how much stock to put in these, but when I look at the amount of UFO traffic that goes around the world every day, every week, there's a lot of UFO activity. This is something that we're still in this community not talking nearly enough about, is the amount of activity going on every single day. I'm a big fan of the National UFO Reporting Center. I encourage anyone to go check it out. Newfork.org, I think, and Peter Davenport's still running it. Sightings are recorded all the time. Just read them. Go through them. I mean, they're not being investigated for the most part, but you've got people reporting what they have seen. And it's fascinating, and many of them are quite dramatic. So there's a lot of activity going on. I don't think there's any question about this. Who is behind it? Is it all aliens, or are some of these ours? Or is there collaboration? That was one of the things that was asked at the hearing yesterday. I forget which congressperson did, but is there kind of communication going on? And by communication, you have to ask, collaboration? Hey, look, this may sound crazy to someone who's not familiar with the field, but the fact is there have been claims for decades.
That's right.
Going way back, of actual collaboration between
an underground bases, no less. Yeah.
An underground bases. I remember the statement of Bill Newhouse. He's no longer alive. Did testing of, he said, of alien craft out in the desert, and talked about a creature named J-Rod, who was a consultant, who was an alien consultant on these things.
That's right.
Even Bob Lazar
Stan Dale claims to have firsthand knowledge of collaboration between Greys and human beings.
I'm sorry, I spoke over you. Who is that?
Stan Dale.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
And also, well,
they're not the only ones.
They're not the only ones. Yeah, there's throughout the history of ufology over the last, let's say, 5 decades, there have been multiple individuals who've come forward and have claimed that there's cooperation going on between various factions.
Dan Sherman wrote a book called Above Black, where he talked about, and it was a very interesting book, by the way. And I will just say, I think I believe it. I think I believe Dan Sherman's book.
This leads me to the next question. And this is, of course, a question that we can only answer with speculation, with some degree of speculation. And what, in your mind, out of all of the different ET factions that are kicked around out there in ufology now, because I think there's just dozens of them at this point, out of all these different ET factions, what would you say, which of these factions in your mind are the most likely to actually exist? Can you give me your top 3 or top 4 factions that you are fairly convinced these guys probably exist?
Yep. One, which is one I avoided for years, are totally human-looking beings.
The Nordics.
We can call them that, sure. And I would just say, because there's just too many of these accounts now, from credible sources. In the early years, for me, I was inclined to want to dismiss those accounts. I just thought, come on, human beings, give me a break. Human beings living on another planet, really? I wasn't buying it. It seemed too outrageous. But I've been thinking about this a lot over the years, and how could there be human-looking beings involved in this? Well, there's a number of scenarios. We can discuss it if you want, but I think there's definitely, we can. But there's, I think, a human-looking faction, big time. And there are several non-human-looking ones. So we all hear about the Greys. Yes, I don't think there's any question. Now, no question. The thing about Greys is that you get different descriptions of them. Sometimes they're stocky. Sometimes they're very skinny. The body plan is always bizarre when you look at the Greys. Super enormous heads, very, very long arms, skinny, spindly bodies. I think those could exist only if they were artificially genetically created for that purpose, but that's probably the case. That begs the question, who created them? Because I don't think that they're a natural species. I mean, first of all, there's no gray. Do
you believe that the insectolins are the native organic species that created the Greys?
That's what David Jacobs believes. And the thing about there's no female gray alien that could actually give birth to a gray baby. Like, it's literally impossible. No. There's no birth canal large enough. I can imagine that would accommodate the head. It's an impossibility. So for me, on that basis alone, they have to be artificially created. The insectolins, as Jacobs calls them, I think he made a pretty good case, actually, in Walking Among Us, and also I think in The Threat, where he talked about this. But definitely Walking Among Us, his last book. His belief is that, gauging on the apparent telepathic capabilities of these, he said the insectolins seem to have the highest level of telepathy. Whenever they are described, which is not frequently, but when they are, they always seem to be in charge. And you can definitely see a kind of physical similarity of the Greys and the insectolins, with genetic modifications for the Greys. So I think, I would say human-looking ones, Greys, insect, and yes, I'm going to say yes on reptilian-type beings. There's enough that are described. My take on all of these, by the way, I believe in things like convergent evolution. So that would be an evolutionary theory in which species that are unrelated to each other still would evolve in ways that are compatible. Head, 2 arms, 2 legs. Arms are a really, really, really important thing for us. Arms with hands that grasp things.
Fingers,
so I could see that body plan developing elsewhere. It's if you want a technologically advanced civilization, the more I think of it, I think that's actually, our body plan is an ideal body plan, and somewhat rare, on planet Earth. I mean, there are other primates who are kind of along the way with what we've got, but we've evolved in a much more complete way to be able to create technology and to manipulate. You have to be able to manipulate things on the planet. My cat, I love my cat. She can't manipulate things very well on this planet. So she doesn't have the opposable thumbs, and she can't grab things. We can do that. And so I think other species could evolve, and probably if they're going to achieve any kind of technology, they must evolve in some way relatively similar to how we have evolved. That's my opinion. But beyond that, if you have a species that's come from elsewhere, this is just me theorizing here, so if you can allow me to do this.
Of course.
They get here, they realize we can't really live on planet Earth. Microbes are not healthy. The solar radiation is not right for us. The gravity is not right for us. All of these things are not right for us. So what would they do? Well, they would want to modify themselves to some extent so that they could have their people, as it were, being able to operate here. So would you modify your biology so that you have, what species do live here? Well, reptiles live here. Insects live here. Humans live here. So would you want to take genetic material from native Earth species,
Very
mix them with your
intriguing
own,
point.
and you create those types of creatures? It's just a theory. Don't
It's a
know if it's
very
true.
good theory. I that's a very intriguing point. You know,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
interesting that I asked you about which of these factions you think is most plausibly real, and those are the exact three that I would list is the so-called Nordics,
Yeah.
the Greys, including the Insectolins and the Reptilians. I would agree with Jacobs in that I believe that the Insectolins are the native species. They created the Greys specifically for the abduction program. And I would, there's one more faction I want to ask you about. What about, and this is the one I know the least about and that I encounter the least in all of my reading and in all the lectures and so forth that I listen to. What about the tall whites?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're more or less human looking. This is Charles Hall. I was trying to figure out if he's alive or not, and I at first thought he wasn't. Then I heard he was, and I don't know. But he's. I'm getting a thumbs up from my wife across the way there. He's still alive, but he's quite advanced in years. Charles Hall talked about the tall whites, and you read his books and you listen to him, and I don't see a guy that's deceptive when I read Charles Hall. I think he is actually scrupulously honest. That's the way he comes across to me. That being so, I'll just add, I don't know if his judgment on everything is entirely to be relied upon. But in terms of what he remembers, what he states, I'm inclined to believe that. And he talks about these beings that are essentially human-looking, roughly speaking.
Right, a little bit more exotic than the so-called
more exotic.
Nordics. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm inclined to allow it, but what's their relationship to the other human-looking beings that people have described? And are they the same? Are they different? This is what I don't know. And there's a lot of other confusions going on. You talk about the Greys. There's really not one type of Grey.
No.
You've got, in terms of crash retrieval lore, I think of researchers like the late Leonard Stringfield. Some of the descriptions he got were very much like gray aliens like we get today. Others, not quite. Similar. Short, yes. Bald, yes. Big black eyes, sometimes yes, sometimes no.
Sometimes eyelids, sometimes no eyelids. Details like that. Yeah.
Even finger amounts has varied. And are these spurious encounters? Some have said 6, some have said 4. What are we talking about here? Could you really have one species that has a variation of 6 and 4? I don't think so. I don't, that seems like too big of a variation to be a natural one. But I keep coming back to the possibility of genetic modifications. You know, we're in CRISPR technology times now.
Right.
We've got the ability to make designer babies. Where will we be with this in 50 to 100 years?
That's right. And if we assume that, for the sake of argument, that the Insectolins are master geneticists, which they probably are, and they're manufacturing the Greys, and they could just as easily manufacture other kinds of entities for specific purposes. Yeah. And that they could then, as you said, they could select they could select components from genetic components from insects, from whatever creature that they think,
if it's possible. I mean, it's beyond my pay grade.
Right. And I would think it is possible since we can, in CRISPR technology, by the way, is very, as you well know, is very rudimentary. It's not it's not super advanced. We're going there. We are headed towards super advanced.
It's like the equivalent of DOS for computers in like 1986.
That's right. That's right.
It was a breakthrough at the time. It was amazing. I remember it. But there's a long way to go after that. So yes.
But now add in artificial intelligence into the equation, and
exactly.
But I could imagine a native species like the Insectolins just creating genetically modified biological entities, or perhaps biological / cybernetic entities, maybe even with artificial intelligence involved in there, for various purposes. And if that's the case, then they would all be specifically manufactured, their size and number of fingers, all of that to complete their function, to fulfill their function. And that's what if these are indeed master, let's call them master geneticists, these insectoid beings, if they do indeed constitute the natural organic species, like Jacobs thinks, and again, I'm inclined to agree with Jacobs, then who knows how many different, again, biological / cybernetic creatures they've created. And that just throws such a massive confusion into the whole topic, because you can't know, for one thing. And then when people are encountering these entities in abduction episodes, for example, and they're seeing the gray guys, which they all see, of course, but then they see the little putty guy, the ones with the putty brown ones that show up every now and again. And then there's the ones that kind of look like, reptoid a little bit, but maybe not in the exact way that most people think. And Jacobs would describe these as having maybe a little bit more scaly skin, whatever. Right. And by the way, Jacobs believed that the insectoids, that this isn't their first rodeo, that they've already gone to other planets elsewhere in the universe and have done this very same procedure.
This is their MO. They do planetary takeover. Yeah, exactly.
And we're just the next in the line. And that's why you see other kinds of creatures involved, that they've genetically modified, because maybe some of these entities were harvested from other planets and are now incorporated into the abduction program on planet Earth. It's a very intriguing theory.
You and I think, roughly agree with David Jacobs.
Yes.
We're among the few. I think there's a lot of folks in ufology. Well, I don't hear a lot of people really getting into this theory. And there's certainly a lot of people who like to attack Jacobs as being very hostile, very fear-based and all of that. I think that's misguided. But I do think that Jacobs' scenario is not the complete scenario. When I think of human-looking beings, this is something that goes back a long way, actually many centuries. In my opinion, there's a lot of spurious accounts of ancient interaction with other beings, but there's some accounts that I do credit. I think that I do credit them, and I've written about them from time to time. If that is true, I ask myself, how do you explain very, very ultra advanced humans operating technology that's not supposed to exist for the time period? And I come up with two scenarios. One is a kind of ancient breakaway civilization. You can imagine that there would be a human group somewhere on the planet that made a discovery that they kept to themselves. They didn't want to share with the rest of the barbaric humans on the planet and develop. I actually don't think that I believe that, because my assumption would be that if there were a human group that did that, they would have just conquered the whole planet.
Exactly.
I mean, this is what Western nations did in the age of imperialism in the 18th, 19th century. They had better guns, better weapons, and they went and went into Asia, went into Africa, and said, okay, you're working for us now. So they did that. They didn't waste any time. And I would assume another human group would do that. Another scenario is that these humans who I've been seen operating advanced craft and so forth, may have been taken by aliens in an early period of time. Aliens visit, they see some of these humans, very primitive, but they're smart. And they're like, we can use you guys. We can breed our own group of them. We'll have you're going to be living with us. And is it possible over a long enough period of time that you have a completely human-grown, human-developed group of people now living with aliens? I know this sounds crazy, but just go with me here. That then were themselves genetically modified, genetically enhanced, made to live 300 years, who knows, and given whatever cybernetic implants and so forth. That I could see. I could see that. And I wonder if that's what some of the, we talk about the Nordics, these very, very advanced being, maybe that's what they are. Maybe they've advanced to middle management in the alien hierarchy, or maybe upper management, who knows.
One final line of inquiry with you before we wrap up, and I know this is sort of a difficult topic to address because there are so many unknowns, but it seems to me very in vogue today in ufology to dismiss the extraterrestrial hypothesis in favor of an extra-dimensional or ultra-terrestrial or something like that hypothesis. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I think, there's a reason for it, but I think ultimately when people go to dismiss the ETH altogether, I think it's misguided. And, we like to talk about Occam's razor every so often. That is the explanation that has the least clutter about it that has the best explanatory value. I think the ETH is still a stronger hypothesis than the interdimensional hypothesis, but it doesn't mean that they're mutually exclusive.
Right.
So I actually don't see that at all, because when we, first of all, does any person who talks about dimensions really understand what dimension is?
No.
I'm not sure anyone really
No.
knows what they're talking about here. We can understand intellectually that there might be these things called dimensions. And we do hear stories every so often about things like portholes opening up and the like. Okay, fair enough. So if that's what a dimension is, you hear physicists over at places like Cambridge University in Britain, who is it? David Deutsch, is that his name? Talking about membranes, the brain. So you have brain being membrane. There's the membrane of your universe is like 6 inches in front of your nose. And then there's another one right there that you can't see. And it's an virtually infinite number of universes all around you. Versions of you, versions of me, going on forever.
Yeah.
That's one version of a multiverse.
One version.
There's one type of a multiverse.
Yes.
Is this true? I don't know if it's true. Who am I supposed to? How am I an expert on this? But in terms of dimensions, here's one thing we're pretty confident about knowing. They mentioned in the hearings yesterday the paper about space-time metric engineering. That was actually a paper written by Hal Puthoff for the ATIP program when he was working for Bigelow. Bigelow was subcontracting to ATIP. One of the things ATIP had Bigelow's company do is, I think this might have been Puthoff's idea, was to come up with a whole array of scientific papers dealing with essentially ET tech. The way that they went out and did this is they contracted with other scientists who did not realize this is what it was. Their request was, we want you to come up with your speculation of the science in your field 30, 40 years from now. What will it be like? I want you to speculate. And he got in all these papers. He wrote one of those papers, and that was on space-time metric engineering. So what the heck does that mean? Well, what we know is that space and time are not what our common sense tells us it is. All right, fair enough. Our common sense tells us time just keeps on ticking into the future, like Steve Miller once said, the great god of rock. Time keeps, but it doesn't quite go like that. Time can be affected by things. Time is affected by gravity. How does that work? Well, I don't know, but it is. Space also can be curved. Mm-hmm. So does this play into dimensions? If you are able to manipulate space and time to some extent, does that mean you can manipulate? Does that play into dimensionality in one way or another? Well, it's beyond my pay grade. But I do think it's entirely possible that you can be an extraterrestrial civilization that has the ability to manipulate space and time and potentially dimensions of reality. That's what I think. And I don't think that they're mutually exclusive. I think the extraterrestrial.
I would agree. And I would also add that I think a lot of people's conceptualization of this idea of extra dimensions comes from movies, comes from, for example, the what's it called? The superhero movies, the MCU.
I can't stand those. I detest.
I also do not like them.
I detest them.
And
so I don't watch them, but yes, I know what you mean.
You have all of these concepts with Doctor Strange and all of this, where you have a litany of different, which are really different theories about extra dimensions, all sort of pancaked together. They're just all convoluted. Yeah. And so when people think about extra dimensions, and I hear people, for example, in the, let's call it on the Christian spectrum, the Christian side of the UFO spectrum, mm-hmm. You hear a lot of Christians saying that, oh no, it's not extraterrestrial, it's extra dimensional.
Yes, that's right.
And I say, well, why? Number one, look, I've never seen another dimension. You've never seen another dimension. There's no scientist on Earth has ever observed another dimension. It's all theorized, and I've got no problem with the theory that there's another dimension. I do subscribe to extra spatial dimensions, which is a different thing than a multiverse. But I can take a telescope and point it at the planet Mars, or I can point it, and I did the other day, and I often say this because it was such a an impactful experience for me. My neighbor works at the university here in Bozeman, Montana, and he sets up the experiments for the physics class and the astronomy class, and they gave him this high-powered telescope to dial in for the class. And he came and knocked on my door because he knows that I have 5 boys, and he knocked on my door and he said, "Hey, I'm playing with this really expensive high-powered telescope. Do you guys want to come look at the planets? I've got it dialed in." And these things now, you put the coordinates in and they move themselves. They like, there's Mars, and then you put the coordinates in for Jupiter and it moves. So we're looking through this telescope, and obviously with the naked eye, all you see is what appears to be a bright star. You look through the telescope and there's Mars. Just like you see it on the NASA images, right there is Mars. You can see some of the landscape on Mars through this telescope. And then we look at Saturn, and I'm looking at the rings of Saturn. Again, what appears to just be a bright dot in the sky, a white dot in the sky. You look through this telescope and boom, there's Saturn. Right?
Oh, that's incredible, right?
Yeah, it's remarkable.
Awesome. To see it
and
yourself,
I'm thinking to myself, looking at these planets, why do people automatically divert to the extra-dimensional hypothesis when we've never seen an extraterrestrial world, but the planets gloss and shimmer in the night sky every day? There they are. They're right there. And furthermore, if these beings, if these entities are capable of moving between dimensions, then why wouldn't they be capable of moving between planets, which would seem like a much easier proposition to me? So they're at least, in my mind, they are at the very least extraterrestrial. Now, are they also extra-dimensional? I don't know. I've never seen another dimension, and it's very theoretical and so forth. Keep
in mind one thing. I want to jump in here. The interdimensional theories became popular starting in the late 60s, early 70s. You had John Keel, Jacques Vallée.
Yeah.
In the circa 1970, our understanding of exoastronomy was almost nil. There was no, I don't want to say nil, but pretty close to it. There was no confirmed extrasolar planet back then. There was still a very strong contingent in the astronomical community saying that life on Earth is unique. There is no life anywhere else in the entire universe. That was the dominant position.
Yeah, that was the dogma.
That's right. There were people who believed otherwise, and they were always out there, but they were a minority. Now they're not the minority. But back when the interdimensional hypothesis first became getting a lot of currency, it was easier to believe that because it was much more common for people to think, no, there's really no other life out there. We are unique. So in terms of actual physical planet, and then of course the distances are really vast. That's why we use the word astronomical. They are, but
also irrelevant if an Einstein-Rosen bridge can be generated.
There you go. I mean, look, 1,000 years ago, the ability to sail across the Pacific Ocean seemed impossible.
Right.
All right. So it's all a matter of the technology and the science that you have at your disposal. My point simply is that the interdimensional hypothesis got its start in part based on what were then the perceived weaknesses of the possibility of exo-astronomical life out there, other planets. We now know there's countless, a virtual infinitude of other planets, many of which are positioned to support life. How many? That's right. Well, that's a big question. It may not be that much, but there may be enough. And so the point is, I think it's very likely life out there. And
I would say that in my estimation, the extraterrestrial hypothesis is still the most plausible.
Yeah, I agree with you.
In my mind. Now, I don't discount an extra-dimensional origin, right? But I just don't know enough, and I don't think anybody knows enough about extra dimensions really to make a determinative statement. These are extraterrestrials. They're not, these are extra dimensionals. They're not extraterrestrial. And I'm always just baffled by that. There's some weird things, like we hear about the Skinwalker Ranch. And there's some very bizarre stories about the Skinwalker Ranch that make you think, all right, what is really going on there? Is this, for example, like some of the cattle mutilations that have taken place there happen almost in the snap of a finger. It's like
who the heck came down to do this and then left within the space of 30 minutes in broad daylight? That's bizarre. You have stories about Skinwalker of genuine portals and allegedly of beings coming through those portals.
That's
okay,
right.
all of this is, and I've spoken to witnesses as well who've told me about portals that they've seen. And so when I get that, I'm certainly like you. I think I'm inclined to think, all right, there's some ability to manipulate this reality, and maybe there is, I guess, what we would call a dimension beyond. It's I don't rule it out.
Or
but like
these
you, I think
portals
the ETH has more explanatory value.
Yes, yes. And these portals that open up could very well be opening up to another atmosphere on a different planet, not necessarily to another dimension. It's not like, because it's like when people talk about other dimensions, what I feel like they're describing is The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. It's you walk through the wardrobe and then you're in Narnia. That's what they're talking about. Well, you could just as easily walk through the wardrobe and you're on Mars. You're on the surface of Mars, right? And in fact, interestingly enough, that's kind of what C.S. Lewis was hinting at, because the
really?
Yes, the
Mars?
antagonist of the story, the White Witch, she came from a different planet called Charn. Right. And a portal opened up, and that's how she got. And also he wrote a Space Odyssey as well. So I think C.S. Lewis was actually thinking
that was Arthur C. Clarke.
What's that?
Arthur C. Clarke did 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Yes, I'm just saying that C.S. Lewis also wrote a space trilogy as well.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know that. Aside
from the Chronicles of Narnia, which I've never read, which I probably should read. So my point is, if you see a portal open up, and I've got a good friend who told me a compelling story about a portal opening up. He sees a different atmosphere inside, 3 saucers come flying out, and then it closes. And in my mind, could that be another dimension? Sure. Could it be like Narnia? Yeah, I guess. But why can't it be the surface of Mars? Why can't it be another planet? Why isn't that just as plausible, if not more plausible?
I guess.
So. Yeah.
We've had some pretty uncredible people, in my view, who have actually said this. They talk about jump rooms to Mars and so forth.
Yes.
But could it actually be true? Yeah, sure, maybe.
It could be true. Sure, anything could be true at this point, I think, when you're talking about advanced technology. Okay, so. Well, this has been a fascinating conversation, just as I knew it would be, Richard. I love talking to you. Again, as I said, you're my favorite ufologist, and I always say this. I think you wrote the Bible on the certainly on the cover up, the national security state and the history of all that. And I highly encourage everybody listening to this to go get Richard's books. If you want an education, not speculation, if you want an education in ufology, you go to Richard Dolan. That's where you go. And I've always said that. And so I really appreciate your academic approach, by the way, Richard. I really respect, because so many people are out there speculating about things endlessly, and you're kind of an anchor in ufology. And I thank you for that. I really appreciate that. So
it's very gracious of you to say. I think speculation is a great thing, and I like to speculate as well. But I do think it's very important to know what your facts are, to know what your skeleton of facts is, and then speculate based on that. And just let people know you are speculating, and don't pretend that your speculation is fact. That's something that we get a little too much of. The last thing I just would like to, if I can emphasize here with you and your viewers, which, by the way, great work on your channel and all the work that you've been doing. I just want to emphasize, we started this conversation by talking about the UAP hearing, and I think it would be useful to bring it back in closing to state that while yesterday was a very big breakthrough, in my view, I think in yours, in terms of public discussion on this subject of ours, there's a long way to go. And one of the things that needs to be broached is, whether or not there have been crash retrievals. That, to me, is one of the big red lines of disclosure. If we get past that, that's important. But then secondarily, we need to be asking, as you and I have been talking, who are these beings? Why are they here? What are they doing? Why so many sightings around the world all the time? What is their infrastructure? Like, there are countless numbers of questions we must be asking. The UFO subject, in other words, it's not some ancient history kind of a thing. It's going on right this minute. There are sightings going on right now. And the question that I'd like to ask is why? And what are they doing? I'm doing research right now on underwater UFOs. And I'm hoping to have this done in less than a year. And the stories that I come across are just mind-blowing. Objects coming out of rivers, objects coming out of oceans. Why? Where were they? Where are they going? What are they doing? We don't have answers, and we need those answers. This is a phenomenon that is incredibly important. And even for those of us who have been devoting our lives to understanding it, it doesn't like to give up answers very easily. So there's a lot that we have a long way to go with this public discussion on UAP.
I wholeheartedly agree. And man, when you were just talking about that, I'm looking forward to that. It's a book you're writing on the underwater UFOs and all that, man. I'm really looking forward to that, because that opens up a whole nother subject matter that we'll have to have a part 2 of this, because you just opened up a whole you opened a can in my brain here of all.
It's an incredible phenomenon.
Yes.
Blowing
So we'll
my
have
mind
to,
as I go into it.
We'll put a bookmark there and have that conversation at another time. But thank you so much for your time, especially coming on with me here the day after such a historic moment. You're the guy. When I thought, this is amazing, this is historic, who do I want to talk to about this? Richard Dolan. That's who I want to talk to about this. So thank you so much for agreeing to this conversation.
My pleasure. Absolutely.